After being unfairly fired for serving a rude millionaire at a high-end restaurant, the waitress thought her world had collapsed. But 24 hours later, a knock on her door changes everything. What the millionaire does next is something she never could have imagined. Sarah Jenkins wiped her brow with the back of her hand, balancing a tray of dirty dishes as she navigated the crowded dining room of the Golden Vine. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware, a stark contrast to the chaos in the kitchen where Sarah had spent the last 6 hours. Table 7 still waiting on their entrees. Linda Williams, Sarah's best friend and fellow waitress, whispered as they passed each other. Sarah nodded, her smile never faltering. On it. She deposited the dishes and hurried to the kitchen, where the head chef barked orders over the sizzle of pans and clatter of utensils. Sarah grabbed the plates for table 7, her arms trembling slightly under the weight. As she approached the table, a booming voice cut through the ambient chatter. "It's about time." Sarah's stomach dropped. Richard Moreau, the notorious millionaire known for his cutting remarks and hefty tips, glared at her from his seat at the head of the table. "I apologize for the wait, sir," Sarah said, setting down the plates with practiced grace. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Yes, you can get me a waiter who knows how to do their job properly. I ordered the filet mignon medium rare. This is clearly overcooked." Sarah's cheeks burned as she glanced at the perfectly pink center of the steak. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moreau, but that appears to be medium rare. If you'd like, I can have the chef prepare another." "Are you arguing with me?" Richard's voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "I know what I ordered, and this is not it. I want to speak to your manager immediately." Sarah's heart raced as she nodded and retreated to find Mr. Harper, the restaurant manager. She found him near the bar, his perpetual frown deepening as she explained the situation. "Mr. Moreau again." Mr. Harper sighed, straightening his tie. "I'll handle this. You just stay out of sight for now." Sarah watched from the kitchen as Mr. Harper approached Richard's table, his posture subservient as he addressed the irate millionaire. After a few minutes of hushed conversation, Mr. Harper beckoned Sarah over. "Miss Jenkins," Mr. Harper said, his voice tight, "Mr. Moreau has brought to my attention your unprofessional behavior. I'm afraid we'll have to let you go, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. "But sir, I didn't." "That's enough," Mr. Harper cut her off. "Please collect your things and leave the premises." Sarah stood frozen, aware of the eyes of every patron and staff member on her. She caught Linda's sympathetic gaze from across the room, but it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. With trembling hands, Sarah untied her apron and made her way to the staff room. She changed out of her uniform in a daze, her mind racing with the implications of losing her job. How would she pay rent? How would she afford her mother's medication? As she exited through the back door, Linda caught up with her. "Sarah, wait. What happened?" Sarah's composure crumbled, and she burst into tears. "They fired me, Linda. Over nothing. That awful man complained, and Mr. Harper just threw me away like I was nothing." Linda wrapped her arms around Sarah, her own eyes glistening. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. This isn't fair. What can I do?" Sarah shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I don't know. I need to get home. Mom will be wondering where I am. Call me later, okay?" Linda squeezed Sarah's hand. "We'll figure something out." Sarah nodded, then turned and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bus ride home was a blur of neon signs and shadowy figures. Sarah leaned her forehead against the cool glass, her mind replaying the night's events on an endless loop. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? As she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself to face her mother. She couldn't let Beth see how broken she felt. "Sarah, is that you?" Beth's voice called out as Sarah entered. "Yeah, Mom, it's me." Sarah forced a smile as she entered her mother's bedroom. Beth sat propped up in bed, a book open on her lap. Despite the pallor of her skin and the thinness of her frame, Beth's eyes sparkled with warmth. "You're home early," Beth observed, patting the bed beside her. "Everything okay?" Sarah sat down, the familiar scent of her mother's lavender lotion wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. "Not really, Mom. I lost my job tonight." Beth's brow furrowed. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened?" As Sarah recounted the evening's events, Beth listened intently, her hand resting on Sarah's arm. When Sarah finished, Beth was quiet for a moment. "You know," Beth said finally, "my grandmother used to say that when one door closes, another opens. This might feel like the end of the world right now, but I promise you, it's not. You're strong, Sarah. You'll find a way through this." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I hope you're right, Mom. I don't know what we're going to do about the bills, your medication." Beth squeezed Sarah's hand. "We'll figure out together. Now, why don't you get some rest? Things often look brighter in the morning." Sarah nodded, kissing her mother's cheek before retreating to her own room. She changed into her pajamas mechanically, her mind a whirlwind of worry and fear. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep seemed impossibly far away. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the city, Richard Moreau stood at the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. The lights of the city twinkled below, a sea of possibilities and secrets. "Did you make the arrangements, Lucas?" Richard asked without turning around. Lucas Gregory, Richard's longtime personal assistant, nodded. "Yes, sir. Everything is in place. Are you sure about this?" Richard turned, his face etched with lines of weariness and something deeper, regret perhaps. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It's time to set things right." Lucas frowned. "But sir, your reputation." "My reputation?" Richard laughed bitterly. "What good is a reputation when you're dying, Lucas? No, this is about legacy now, about making amends." He set down his glass and moved to his desk, pulling out a file. Sarah Jenkins, 28 years old, worked at the Golden Vine to support her sick mother. No father in the picture. Struggles to make ends meet, but never misses a bill payment. Volunteers at the local shelter when she can. Lucas's frown deepened. "You've certainly done your research, sir." Richard nodded. "I had to be sure. She's the one, Lucas. She's the one who can carry on what I've started. And if she refuses?" Richard's eyes gleamed with determination. "She won't. Once she understands what's at stake, she'll make the right choice. She has to." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning as her mind conjured increasingly dire scenarios. Now, as she sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of lukewarm coffee, the reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. A knock at the door startled her out of her reverie. Sarah frowned, glancing at the clock. It was barely 7 a.m. Who could be calling at this hour? She opened the door, and her jaw dropped. Standing before her, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, was Richard Moreau. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins," Richard said, his voice softer than she remembered from the night before. "May I come in?" Sarah blinked, certain she must still be dreaming. "What are you doing here? How did you find out where I live?" Richard's lips quirked in a half-smile. "I have my ways, but please, I'd rather not discuss this in the hallway." Against her better judgment, Sarah stepped aside, allowing Richard to enter. She led him to the small living room, acutely aware of how shabby it must look to someone of his wealth. "Mr. Moreau," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly, "if you've come to apologize—" "I have," Richard interrupted, "but that's not the only reason I'm here." He paused, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on Sarah. "I'd like to offer you a job." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "A job? You got me fired last night, and now you want to offer me a job?" Richard nodded, unperturbed by her incredulity. "Yes, as my personal assistant. The pay is substantial, and the benefits are, well, let's just say they're life-changing." Sarah's mind reeled. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Why me? Why would you want to hire someone you clearly thought was incompetent just last night? Richard's expression softened. Because, Miss Jenkins, last night was a test. One that you passed with flying colors, I might add. Your grace under pressure, your integrity, these are qualities I value highly. Sarah shook her head, struggling to process this information. A test? You purposely got me fired as a test. I know it seems cruel, Richard admitted, but I needed to be sure. You see, Miss Jenkins, I'm not just offering you a job. I'm offering you a chance to change lives, starting with your own. As Richard continued to explain, outlining a proposition that seemed too fantastical to be real, Sarah felt as though she'd stepped into an alternate reality. A millionaire knocking on her door, offering her not just a job, but a potential fortune? It was the stuff of fairy tales. Yet as she looked into Richard's eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause. Behind the confident exterior, there was a vulnerability, a desperation even. This man, for all his wealth and power, needed something from her. This is a lot to take in, Sarah said finally. I don't know what to say. Richard nodded, standing up. I understand. Take some time to think it over, but don't take too long. Time, as they say, is of the essence. He handed her a business card. Call me when you've made your decision. As Richard left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, her head spinning. The business card felt heavy in her hand, a weight of possibility and uncertainty. Sarah, who was that? Beth called from her room. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It's a long story, Mom, a really long story. As she went to explain the bizarre turn of events to her mother, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change dramatically. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Sarah's fingers trembled as she pressed the elevator button in Richard Moreau's opulent high-rise. The mirrored walls reflected her nervous expression, a stark contrast to the confident business people surrounding her. As the elevator ascended, Sarah's mind raced with doubts about her decision to accept Richard's job offer. The doors slid open, revealing a sprawling penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but Sarah barely noticed, her attention fixed on the imposing figure behind a mahogany desk. Richard looked up from his computer, his piercing gaze softening slightly as he recognized her. Ah, Miss Jenkins. Right on time. Sarah straightened her shoulders, determined to appear more confident than she felt. Good morning, Mr. Moreau. I'm ready to begin. A ghost of a smile flickered across Richard's face. Excellent. Lucas will show you to your desk and brief you on your duties. As if summoned, Lucas Gregory appeared at Sarah's elbow, his expression unreadable. This way, please. Sarah followed Lucas to a small office adjacent to Richard's. The space was immaculate, with state-of-the-art technology and a view that rivaled Richard's own. Lucas's voice cut through her awe. Your primary responsibilities will be managing Mr. Moreau's schedule, correspondence, and personal affairs. I suggest you familiarize yourself with his contacts and preferences quickly. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb the information. Of course. Is there anything else I should know? Lucas's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Just remember your place, Miss Jenkins. Mr. Moreau's generosity should not be mistaken for friendship. With that cryptic warning, Lucas left Sarah alone in her new office. She sank into the plush leather chair, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into her new role, determined to prove her worth. She organized Richard's chaotic schedule, streamlined his communication systems, and anticipated his needs before he could voice them. Despite her best efforts, Richard remained an enigma. His mood swings were unpredictable, oscillating between brusque commands and moments of unexpected kindness. Sarah often caught him staring out the window, lost in thought, a sadness etched into the lines of his face. One evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave, Richard called her into his office. Miss Jenkins, I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. Sarah frowned, checking her tablet. But sir, you have a board meeting at 2 p.m. It's been on the books for months. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Cancel it. Tell them I'm ill or something. Is everything all right, Mr. Moreau? For a moment, Richard's mask slipped, revealing a vulnerability that startled Sarah. No, Miss Jenkins, everything is not all right, but that's not your concern. Sarah hesitated, then took a risk. With all due respect, sir, if it affects your work, it is my concern. Richard's eyes flashed with an unreadable emotion. Very well. Sit down, Miss Jenkins. It's time we had a proper conversation. As Sarah settled into the chair across from Richard, she noticed the tremor in his hands as he poured 2 glasses of scotch. He pushed one towards her, then leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. I grew up poor, you know, Richard began, his voice low. Dirt poor. My father worked himself to death in a factory, and my mother, well, she checked out long before that. Sarah listened intently, sensing the weight of Richard's words. He continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the windows. I swore I'd never be poor again. I clawed my way to the top, stepped on anyone who got in my way. And now look at me. He gestured around the opulent office. I have everything money can buy, and it means nothing. Sarah's brow furrowed. I don't understand, Mr. Moreau. Why are you telling me this? Richard's eyes snapped back to her, suddenly intense. Because, Miss Jenkins, I'm dying, and I need someone to carry on my legacy. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Dying. But how? Cancer. Aggressive. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. Richard's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah could see the fear lurking beneath the surface. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered, her mind reeling. Is there anything I can do? Richard's laugh was bitter. You're already doing it, Miss Jenkins. You're here, aren't you? Learning the ropes, seeing how all this works. Suddenly, Richard's erratic behavior, the job offer, everything clicked into place. You're grooming me, Sarah realized aloud. But why me? Because you have something I lost long ago. Compassion, integrity, the ability to see people as more than just means to an end. Richard leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want you to inherit my fortune, Sarah. All of it. But there's a condition. Sarah's heart raced. What condition? You must use it to help others, to make a real difference in people's lives. Can you do that? The weight of Richard's words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She thought of her mother, struggling with medical bills, of Linda, working double shifts just to make rent, of all the people in her neighborhood, fighting every day just to survive. I don't know what to say, Sarah stammered. Richard's expression softened. You don't have to decide right now. But think about it, Sarah. Think about the good you could do. As Sarah left the office that night, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The enormity of Richard's offer was overwhelming, but so was the responsibility that came with it. Over the next few weeks, Sarah observed Richard with new eyes. She noticed the way he flinched when bad news came from the charity organizations he secretly funded, the gentle way he spoke to the cleaning staff, asking about their families, the sadness that lingered in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. One day, while organizing Richard's files, Sarah stumbled upon a stack of letters. Curiosity got the better of her, and she began to read. To her shock, they were thank you notes from people in her own neighborhood, people whose lives had been changed by anonymous donations. Donations she now realized had come from Richard. I see you found my dirty little secret. Richard's voice startled her. Sarah whirled around, guilt written across her face. Mr. Moreau, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to pry. Richard held up a hand, silencing her. It's all right, Sarah. I wanted you to find them eventually. It's part of what I've been trying to show you. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. The community center renovation last year. The scholarship fund for local kids. That was all you? Richard nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. Anonymous donations. It's amazing what a little money can do when it's used right. But why keep it a secret? Sarah asked, still struggling to reconcile this information with the arrogant millionaire she'd first met. Richard's expression darkened. Because money changes people, Sarah. It changes how they see you, how they treat you. I learned it the hard way." As Richard spoke, Sarah began to understand the depth of his loneliness, the weight of the mask he wore every day. She saw, for the first time, the man behind the millionaire, a man desperate to make amends for a lifetime of mistakes. "Mr. Moreau," Sarah began hesitantly, "I think I understand now why you chose me, why you're doing all this." Richard's eyes met hers, a glimmer of hope in their depths. And Sarah took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing in that moment. "I'll do it. I'll accept your offer, but not for the money, for the chance to continue what you've started, to help people who really need it." Relief washed over Richard's face, making him look years younger. "Thank you, Sarah. You have no idea what this means to me." As Sarah left Richard's office that day, she felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. But along with it came a sense of purpose, a determination to honor the trust Richard had placed in her. Little did she know, the true challenges were yet to come. As Richard's health declined and the reality of her new role set in, Sarah would face obstacles she never could have imagined. But for now, she walked with her head held high, ready to embrace the unexpected journey ahead. Sarah's fingers trembled as she unlocked the filing cabinet in Richard's study. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of medical equipment in Richard's bedroom. She glanced over her shoulder, heart pounding, before pulling out a stack of folders. As she leafed through the documents, her eyes widened. Page after page revealed a hidden network of charitable donations, all made anonymously. Scholarships for local students, funding for community programs, even direct financial aid to families in crisis. A familiar name caught her eye. Linda Williams. Sarah whispered, tracing her finger over the entry. Her best friend had received an anonymous grant to cover her mother's medical bills last year. Linda had called it a miracle. Now Sarah knew the truth. The sound of approaching footsteps made Sarah scramble to replace the files. She barely managed to close the cabinet before Lucas appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Miss Jenkins, what are you doing in here?" Sarah straightened, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Just organizing some paperwork for Mr. Moreau. He asked me to." "Mr. Moreau is resting." Lucas cut her off, his tone icy. "I suggest you return to your regular duties." As Sarah hurried past him, Lucas's voice stopped her. "Be careful, Miss Jenkins. Curiosity can be dangerous in this house." The warning lingered in Sarah's mind as she made her way to the kitchen. She busied herself preparing Richard's lunch, her thoughts racing. The man she'd come to know over the past weeks was so different from the arrogant millionaire she'd first encountered. Which was the real Richard Moreau? A soft knock interrupted her musings. Martha Collins, a local community leader, stood in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. "Hello, Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting." Sarah shook her head, gesturing for Martha to enter. "Not all. Is everything okay?" Martha sighed, sinking into a chair. "I'm worried about the community center. Our funding's been cut, and I don't know how we'll keep the doors open next month." Sarah's mind flashed to the documents she discovered. "Have you considered reaching out to local donors? I'm sure there are people who'd want to help." A sad smile crossed Martha's face. "We've tried, but our biggest supporter, well, let's just say he's no longer able to assist." Before Sarah could respond, Richard's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sarah, could you come here, please?" Sarah excused herself, promising Martha they'd talk more later. As she climbed the stairs to Richard's room, her resolve strengthened. She needed answers. Richard was propped up in bed, looking frilier than ever. His eyes, however, were sharp as they met Sarah's. "You've been snooping," he stated without preamble. Sarah's breath caught. "Mr. Moreau, Richard held up a hand. "It's all right, Sarah. I knew you would eventually. It's why I chose you." Sarah sank into the chair beside his bed. "I don't understand. All those donations, the people you've helped, why keep it a secret?" A wry smile tugged at Richard's lips. "Money changes people, Sarah. When they know you have it, they treat you differently. I wanted to help without strings, without expectations. But the restaurant, Sarah pressed. Why did you act so cruel? Richard's expression darkened. I needed to be sure, to see how you'd react under pressure, faced with injustice. You showed grace and integrity, even when it cost you everything. Sarah's mind reeled. So it was all a test. My job, my livelihood. I know it seems harsh, Richard admitted, but I needed to find someone I could trust with my legacy. Someone who understands the value of kindness, of helping others without expecting anything in return. As the full weight of Richard's words sank in, Sarah felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Anger at the manipulation, awe at the scope of Richard's generosity, and a growing sense of responsibility. Why me? She whispered. Richard's eyes softened. Because you remind me of who I used to be, before the money and the power corrupted me. You have a chance to do what I couldn't, to use this wealth to make a real difference, without losing yourself in the process. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lucas entered, his face grave. Mr. Moreau, your lawyer, is here to discuss the will. Richard nodded, then turned back to Sarah. Think about what I've said. The choice is yours, but remember, with great power comes great responsibility. As Sarah left the room, her head spinning, she nearly collided with an elegantly dressed woman in the hallway. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah exclaimed. The woman waved off her apology with a graceful hand. No harm done, dear. I'm Eleanor Benson. I have an appointment with Richard. Sarah's eyes widened in recognition. Eleanor Benson had once been a prominent socialite, known for her lavish parties and charitable work. But rumors of financial ruin had circulated a few years back, and she'd all but disappeared from the social scene. Of course, Mrs. Benson. Mr. Moreau is just finishing up a meeting, but I'll let him know you're here. Eleanor's keen eyes studied Sarah. You must be the new assistant Richard's been raving about. Sarah, isn't it? Sarah nodded, surprised. He's mentioned me. A knowing smile played on Eleanor's lips. Oh, yes, quite frequently. Richard has always had an eye for potential. I have a feeling you and I will be seeing a lot more of each other in the coming days. Before Sarah could respond, Lucas appeared, ushering Eleanor into Richard's room. As the door closed behind them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. Later that evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave, Linda called. Sarah, you won't believe what happened. Linda's voice bubbled with excitement. Remember that grant I got from Mom's medical bills? Well, I just found out who it came from. It was Richard Moreau. Sarah's breath caught. How did you find out? Martha Collins told me. Apparently, he's been the anonymous donor behind half the community programs in town. Can you believe it? The same guy who got you fired. As Linda continued to chatter, Sarah's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture of Richard Moreau that was far more complex than she'd ever imagined. Sarah, are you still there? Sarah shook herself out of her reverie. Yes, sorry. Just processing. Listen, Linda, there's something I need to tell you. Over the next hour, Sarah poured out the whole story. The job offer, Richard's illness, and the incredible proposition he'd made. Linda listened in stunned silence. So let me get this straight, Linda said when Sarah finally finished. Richard Moreau, secret philanthropist extraordinaire, wants to leave you his entire fortune on the condition that you use it to help people. Sarah nodded, then remembered Linda couldn't see her. Yes, and I have no idea what to do. Linda's voice softened. Sarah, honey, I think you do know. You've always wanted to make a difference in the world. This is your chance. But it's so much responsibility, Sarah whispered. What if I mess it up? Then you'll learn and do better next time, Linda said firmly. Sarah, you're the most compassionate, level-headed person I know. If anyone can handle this, it's you. As they said their goodbyes, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Linda was right. This was an opportunity to do real good in the world. But first, she needed to clear the air with Richard. The next morning, Sarah marched into Richard's study, determination etched on her face. Richard looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. Mr. Moreau, we need to talk." A smile tugged at Richard's lips. "I was wondering when you'd come around. Have a seat, Sarah." Sarah took a deep breath. "I understand why you did what you did at the restaurant. I don't agree with your methods, but I understand the intention behind them. And I've seen the good you've done for this community." Richard nodded, his expression serious. But if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to take on this responsibility, I need complete honesty from you. No more tests, no more secrets. Can you promise me that?" For a long moment, Richard studied her face. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right, Sarah. You deserve the truth. All of it. Are you ready to hear it?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'm ready." Over the next few hours, Richard laid bare the full extent of his philanthropic work, the reasons behind his public persona, and his hopes for the future. He spoke of his regrets, his fears, and his dreams for what his fortune could accomplish in the right hands. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the study, Richard leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched on his face. "So now you know everything," he said softly. "The question is, what will you do with this knowledge?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing all she'd learned. Finally, she met Richard's gaze, her decision clear in her eyes. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll accept your offer, not for the money, but for the chance to continue the work you've started, to help people who really need it." Relief washed over Richard's face, making him look years younger. "Thank you, Sarah. You have no idea what this means to me." As Sarah left Richard's study that evening, she felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. But along with it came a sense of purpose, a determination to honor the trust Richard had placed in her. Little did she know, the true challenges were yet to come. As Richard's health declined and the reality of her new role set in, Sarah would face obstacles she never could have imagined. But for now, she walked with her head held high, ready to embrace the unexpected journey ahead. The coming weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah worked closely with Richard, learning the intricacies of his financial empire and the network of charities he supported. She met with lawyers, financial advisors, and community leaders, preparing for the monumental task ahead. Through it all, Richard's health continued to decline. Some days, he was barely able to leave his bed. On others, he rallied, his sharp mind and dry wit reminding Sarah of the man she'd first met. One particularly difficult evening, as Sarah was helping Richard back to bed after a coughing fit, he gripped her hand tightly. "Sarah," he wheezed, his eyes intense. "Promise me something." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Anything. Promise me you won't let this change you. The money, the power, it can corrupt even the best of us. Don't lose sight of who you are." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I promise, Richard. I won't let you down." As she turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "And Sarah, thank you for everything." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Sarah smiled softly, then slipped out of the room, leaving Richard to rest. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. The enormity of what lay ahead threatened to overwhelm her. But as she thought of her mother, of Linda, of all the people in her community who could benefit from Richard's legacy, she felt her resolve strengthen. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah was ready to face them. She had been given an incredible opportunity, and she was determined to make the most of it. Not just for Richard, but for all the people whose lives she could change for the better. With renewed purpose, Sarah straightened her shoulders and headed down the hallway. There was work to be done, and she was ready to begin. Sarah stood at the foot of her mother's bed, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. Beth Jenkins looked up from her book, her eyes filled with concern. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Mom, I need your advice. Richard, he's offered me something incredible, but I'm scared." Beth set her book aside, giving Sarah her full attention. "Tell me everything." As Sarah poured out the whole story, Richard's illness, his secret philanthropy, and his offer to make her his heir, Beth listened intently. When Sarah finished, silence filled the room. That's quite a responsibility, Beth said finally. What does your heart tell you? Sarah's eyes welled with tears. That's just it. Part of me wants to run away from all of this. It's too much. But another part. Go on, Beth encouraged gently. Another part of me sees this as a chance to make a real difference, to help people the way we've always talked about. Sarah's voice grew stronger. To create the kind of support system we wished we'd had when things were at their worst. Beth reached out, clasping Sarah's hand. Then, I think you have your answer. Sarah met her mother's gaze, seeing the pride shining there. You really think I can do this? I know you can, Beth said firmly. You've always had a giving heart, Sarah. This is your chance to share that with the world. As Sarah left her mother's room, her steps felt lighter. The path ahead was daunting, but she knew now that it was the right one. The next morning, Sarah strode into Richard's study with newfound determination. Richard looked up from his desk, his eyebrows raised in surprise. I'll do it, Sarah announced without preamble. I accept your offer. A smile spread across Richard's face, but Sarah held up a hand. On one condition. Richard leaned back in his chair, intrigued. And what's that? Complete transparency, Sarah said firmly. No more secrets, no more tests. If we're going to do this, we do it as partners, equals. For a long moment, Richard studied her face. Then, slowly, he nodded. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Jenkins, but I accept your terms. As they shook hands, a spark of understanding passed between them. This was more than a business arrangement. It was the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives. Over the next few weeks, Richard's health declined rapidly. Sarah found herself spending more and more time at his bedside, not as an employee, but as a friend and confidant. One particularly difficult evening, as Sarah was helping Richard sit up to take his medication, he gripped her hand tightly. Sarah, he wheezed, his eyes intense. I need you to know something. Sarah leaned in, concern etched on her face. What is it? You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, Richard said softly. Hope, connection, a reason to believe that all of this, he gestured weakly around the opulent room, might actually mean something in the end. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Richard, he shook his head, cutting her off. Let me finish. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Sarah. Hurt a lot of people in my pursuit of wealth and power. But choosing you to carry on my legacy, that's the one thing I know I've gotten right. Sarah squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Promise me something, Richard continued, his voice growing weaker. Promise me you'll use this money to bring people together, to heal the rifts that wealth and poverty create, to show the world that kindness is the greatest currency of all. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I promise, Richard, I won't let you down. A peaceful smile spread across Richard's face. I know you won't. His eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out as he fell into a deep sleep. Sarah sat with him through the night, holding his hand and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Richard took his last breath. The days that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and legal meetings. Sarah found herself thrust into a world she barely understood, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors all clamoring for her attention. Through it all, she clung to Richard's final words, using them as a compass to guide her decisions. When the dust settled, Sarah found herself the owner of a vast fortune and an even greater responsibility. Her first order of business was to reach out to Martha Collins and Eleanor Benson, two women who had been secretly helped by Richard over the years. Together, they began to plan for the future. A community center, Sarah explained, spreading blueprints across the table. A place where people can come for help with job training, childcare, financial advice, whatever they need to get back on their feet. Martha's eyes lit up. That's exactly what this town needs. But the cost is no longer an issue, Sarah finished with a smile. Richard left us everything we need to make this happen. Now, it's up to us to use it wisely. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah threw herself into the project. The old warehouse on the edge of town was transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Classrooms for adult education, a daycare center, a food bank, and offices for financial and legal aid all found a home within its walls. On the day of the grand opening, Sarah stood before a crowd of eager faces, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. "Welcome, everyone, to the Richer Moreau Community Center," she began, her voice strong and clear. "This place represents a dream, not just mine or Richard's, but a dream shared by everyone who's ever struggled and wished for a helping hand." As Sarah continued her speech, she caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Linda, beaming with pride. Her mother, Beth, looking healthier than she had in years. Even Mr. Harper from the Golden Vine, his expression a mix of awe and regret. "This center is more than just a building," Sarah concluded. "It's a promise. A promise that no one in this community will ever have to face their battles alone. That together, we can lift each other up and create a brighter future for all of us." The crowd erupted in applause as Sarah cut the ribbon, officially opening the doors. As people streamed inside, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Lucas Gregory, Richard's former assistant, standing beside her. "He would be proud," Lucas said softly. "You've done well, Sarah." Sarah smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. That means more than you know." As the day wore on, Sarah found herself constantly in motion, greeting visitors, answering questions, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. It wasn't until late in the evening, as the last of the guests were leaving, that she finally had a moment to herself. She wandered through the quiet halls, running her hand along the freshly painted walls. In each room, she saw potential, lives that would be changed, families that would be strengthened, dreams that would be realized. Sarah paused in front of a large portrait of Richard that hung in the main hallway. She studied his face, remembering the arrogant millionaire she'd first encountered and marveling at how much had changed. "We did it, Richard," she whispered. "This is just the beginning." As if in response, a warm breeze drifted through the open window, ruffling Sarah's hair. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But as Sarah looked around at what they had already accomplished, she knew that she was on the right path. She thought back to that fateful day at the Golden Vine, when she'd lost her job and thought her world was ending. How could she have known that it was actually the beginning of something extraordinary? Sarah's phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. A text from Linda. Drinks to celebrate. The whole gang's waiting at O'Malley's. Sarah smiled, typing out a quick reply. "On my way. First round's on me." As she locked up the community center and stepped out into the cool evening air, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. For Richard, for this opportunity, and for the chance to make a real difference in the world. The street was quiet, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Sarah paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of it all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help those in need. But for now, she was content to celebrate how far they'd come. Sarah began the walk to O'Malley's, her steps light and purposeful. The future stretched out before her, full of possibility and hope, and she was ready to embrace it, one act of kindness at a time. As she rounded the corner, the sounds of laughter and music drifted from the pub. Sarah quickened her pace, eager to join her friends and share in their joy. This was what it was all about, she realized. Not the money or the power, but the connections, the community, the chance to lift each other up and create something beautiful together. Sarah pushed open the door to O'Malley's, greeted by a chorus of cheers and raised glasses. As she joined her friends, she felt a sense of belonging wash over her. This was home. This was family. And thanks to Richard's legacy and her own determination, it was a family that would continue to grow and thrive for years to come. Sarah raised her glass, meeting the eyes of each person around the table. "To new beginnings," she toasted. and to the power of kindness to change the world. As their glasses clinked together, Sarah knew that this was just the start of an incredible journey. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, not alone, but surrounded by a community of people dedicated to making a difference. The night wore on, filled with laughter, stories, and plans for the future. And through it all, Sarah felt the weight of her responsibility not as a burden, but as a gift. A chance to create the kind of world she'd always dreamed of, one act of generosity at a time. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The stars twinkled overhead, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. She thought of Richard, of the journey that had brought her to this moment, and of all the lives that would be touched by the work they'd begun. A smile spread across her face as she turned towards home, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. For Sarah Jenkins, former waitress turned philanthropist, this was not an ending, but a beautiful new beginning. And she couldn't wait to see where it would lead.